I tried to impress my crush by cooking and set off the fire alarm instead. Looking back, I should have known that attempting to cook a 5-course meal for Sarah was a terrible idea. My culinary experience consisted of microwave dinners, toast, occasionally burnt, and one memorable incident where I somehow made instant ramen inedible. But when Sarah mentioned she loved a person who can cook, my brain short-circuited, and I heard myself say, "You know, I make a mean coq au vin." I don't even know what coq au vin is. Or rather, I didn't until 3 days before our date when I frantically Googled it and discovered it's a fancy French chicken dish that apparently takes years of culinary school to master. But by then, I'd already committed to the lie, and Sarah's eyes had lit up with genuine excitement. "Really? I've always wanted to try authentic coq au vin," she'd said, touching my arm in that way that makes my brain turn to mush. Most people just order takeout, but home-cooked French cuisine? That's so impressive. And that's how I found myself standing in my tiny apartment kitchen on a Friday evening, surrounded by more ingredients than I'd purchased in the last 6 months combined, staring at a recipe that might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics. The recipe called for pearl onions. I didn't know onions came in pearl form. I thought pearls came from oysters. I bought regular onions and hoped for the best. Sarah was due to arrive in exactly 2 hours. I'd given myself what I thought was a generous amount of time, considering the recipe said prep time, 20 minutes, cook time, 45 minutes. In my defense, I didn't realize that prep time assumed you were someone who knew the difference between dicing, mincing, and julienning. To me, it all meant cut into smaller pieces. I started with the chicken. The recipe said to pat dry and season generously. I patted the chicken. It made a disturbing squelching sound. I patted harder. More squelching. I questioned every decision that had led me to this moment. After wrestling with the chicken for 10 minutes and losing, based on the raw chicken juice now coating my shirt, I moved on to chopping vegetables. The recipe required carrots, onions, mushrooms, and something called lardons, which apparently is fancy bacon. I'd splurged on the fancy bacon because if I was going down with expensive pork products. 45 minutes into prep, I'd managed to cut myself twice, both times on a carrot, which felt particularly humiliating, drop an entire container of mushrooms on the floor, and realize that I'd accidentally bought cooking wine instead of the dry red wine the recipe specified. They're both wine, right? How different could they be? Very different, as it turns out. But I wouldn't learn that until later. With an hour and 15 minutes until Sarah's arrival, I finally got everything into a pot that was probably too small but was the only pot I owned that wasn't currently holding a dying succulent I kept forgetting to transplant. The recipe said to bring to a simmer. I turned the heat to high, because I was behind schedule and needed this to simmer fast. While the coq au vin did its thing, which mostly involved making ominous bubbling sounds, I moved on to the side dishes. I'd ambitiously planned roasted asparagus and twice-baked potatoes, which I'd chosen purely because they sounded impressive. I failed to consider that twice-baked meant baking them twice, which meant double the time. The potatoes went into the oven. I cranked it to 425 degrees Fahrenheit and set a timer on my phone, feeling momentarily competent. Then I returned to the coq au vin, which was now boiling violently and splashing what I can only describe as angry wine chicken lava onto my stovetop. The recipe definitely hadn't mentioned angry chicken lava. I turned the heat down from high to less high. I don't really understand my stove settings. There are numbers, but they seem more like suggestions than actual measurements. I added the cooking wine. The pot hissed like I'd insulted its mother. A plume of steam erupted, temporarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, the liquid in the pot had turned an alarming shade of purple gray. I was pretty sure coq au vin wasn't supposed to be purple gray, but I was in too deep to turn back now. 50 minutes until Sarah arrived. I still needed to shower, change out of my chicken juice shirt, and somehow clean a kitchen that looked like a tornado had fought a food processor and both lost. I decided to multitask. I'd put the asparagus in the oven with the potatoes, efficient, hop in the shower, and come back to a perfectly cooked meal. This plan had no flaws that I could see. I arranged the asparagus on a baking sheet, drizzled it with olive oil, dumped approximately half a bottle because I'm not good at drizzling, and sprinkled it with salt. Then I realized I'd forgotten to wash the asparagus. Could you get sick from unwashed asparagus? Probably not. I added more olive oil, to be safe. Logic. Into the oven it went, on the rack below the potatoes. I set another timer for 15 minutes and jumped in the shower, feeling like a culinary genius who'd figured out the system. The shower was glorious. Hot water cascaded over my chicken-scented body, washing away the stress and carrot-related injuries. For 7 blissful minutes, I wasn't a person about to serve possibly poisonous purple chicken to my crush. I was just a guy, standing in a shower, singing a Beyoncé song off-key. Then I smelled smoke. Not the is something burning kind of smoke. The your apartment is actively becoming an oven kind of smoke. I turned off the water and listened. I could hear something crackling. That wasn't right. Food shouldn't crackle. Food should simmer? Bake? I wasn't sure, but crackling seemed wrong. I grabbed a towel, wrapped it around my waist, and sprinted to the kitchen, leaving a trail of wet footprints across my apartment. The scene that greeted me can only be described as biblical. Smoke was pouring from the oven. The pot on the stove had boiled over, creating a purple-gray waterfall down the front of my stove. And somehow, I still don't know how, there was what appeared to be a small fire on the back burner that I definitely hadn't turned on. I stood there, dripping wet in a towel, trying to process the chaos. Okay, I said to myself. Priorities. First, the fire. I turned off all the burners, grabbed the fire extinguisher I'd received as a housewarming gift and never expected to use, and briefly considered whether I needed to pull the pin or just bash the fire with it. Thankfully, years of fire safety assemblies kicked in. Pin, aim, squeeze. A jet of white foam erupted from the extinguisher, covering not just the small fire, which turned out to be a dish towel I'd apparently left on the burner, but also most of my stovetop, the purple chicken lava pot, and a good portion of the wall. The fire went out. So that was good. The oven was still smoking. I grabbed oven mitts and opened it, releasing a cloud of smoke that immediately filled my apartment. Through the haze, I could see that the asparagus had transformed into charcoal sculptures. The twice-baked potatoes were once burnt potatoes. The oil I'd so generously applied to the asparagus had dripped onto the oven's heating element, where it was now burning with the intensity of 1,000 suns. That's when the fire alarm went off. Not just my apartment's fire alarm. The building's fire alarm. the one connected to every unit in our 6-story complex. The sound was apocalyptic. A blaring siren accompanied by a robotic voice announcing, "Fire. Please evacuate the building. Fire. Please evacuate the building." I stood in my kitchen, wearing nothing but a damp towel, surrounded by smoke, fire extinguisher foam, purple chicken lava, and carbonized vegetables, listening to my neighbors in the apartments around me start to panic. Doors slammed. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. Someone's dog was barking hysterically. And then, because the universe has a sick sense of humor, there was a knock at my door. "Hey, is everything okay in there?" called a familiar voice. Sarah's voice. She was early. Of course she was early. I looked down at my towel. I looked at my disaster kitchen. I looked at the door. I made a decision that in hindsight was probably the wrong decision. I opened the door. Sarah stood in the hallway, wearing a beautiful blue dress and holding a bottle of wine. Behind her, Mr. Patterson from 3B was herding his 3 cats into carriers. The smoke from my apartment was now billowing into the hallway. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Sarah's eyes went wide. "Wait, are you wearing a towel?" "I can explain," I said, which was a lie because I absolutely could not explain. "Is the building on fire because of you?" Before I could answer, Mrs. Chun from across the hall stuck her head out. "Is it safe? Should we evacuate?" The robotic voice continued. "Fire. Please evacuate the building." "It's fine," I called out, my voice cracking. "Just a small cooking incident. Everything's under control. The fire alarm suggests otherwise," Mr. Patterson said dryly, struggling with a particularly angry tabby. Sarah stepped into my apartment, waving smoke away from her face. She surveyed the scene, the foam-covered stove, the smoking oven, which I still hadn't turned off, the purple pot, the wet footprints, and me, standing there like the world's least impressive superhero. "Were you trying to cook?" she asked slowly. "Cook Ovin," I admitted in a small voice. "I wanted to impress you." She stared at me. I waited for her to leave, to run screaming, to call the fire department and possibly the health department. Instead, she started laughing. Not a polite chuckle. A full, shoulder-shaking, tears streaming down her face laugh. "You," she gasped between giggles. "You said you made a mean Coke Ovin." "I do. Look how mean it is. It tried to burn down the building." This made her laugh harder. She bent over, clutching her stomach. Other neighbors were now peering into my apartment, but Sarah didn't care. She laughed until the fire alarm finally, mercifully, stopped. In the ringing silence that followed, she wiped her eyes and looked at me with something that might have been affection. "You don't know how to cook at all, do you?" "I made toast yesterday," I offered. "Only burnt it a little." She shook her head, still smiling. "Go put on some actual clothes. We're ordering pizza." You're not leaving? Are you kidding? This is the best date story I'll ever have." She pulled out her phone. "Besides, anyone who'd risk fire and public humiliation in a towel to impress me deserves a second chance. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Next time you want to impress me, maybe just buy takeout?" "I promise. Can I also promise to never use the phrase Coke Oven again?" "That would be advisable." 20 minutes later, I was dressed, the smoke had cleared, and we were sitting on my couch eating pepperoni pizza. The purple pot was soaking in the sink. The fire extinguisher sat on the counter like a trophy. My neighbors had forgiven me, though Mr. Patterson said I owed him wine for the trauma I'd caused his cats. "So," Sarah said, taking a bite of pizza, "on a scale of 1 to 10, how embarrassed are you right now?" 11. Maybe 12. "Good." She grinned. "Because I'm definitely telling everyone about this." "That's fair." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and despite everything, the fire alarm, the evacuation, the towel incident that would probably become building legend, I felt pretty good. "Hey," Sarah said softly. "For what it's worth, I think it's sweet that you tried. Even though I almost burned down the building? Especially because you almost burned down the building. And that's how I learned that sometimes impressing someone isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to fail spectacularly while wearing nothing but a towel, and somehow still making them laugh. Also, I learned that pearl onions are actually a thing, and Coke Oven definitely isn't supposed to be purple. But mostly the towel thing.